Hi, this is Peter Schweizer, and welcome to the Drill Down. Well, if someone is going to indoctrinate your kids, they're not exactly going to say we're indoctrinating your kids. They're going to wrap it into something else. We're going to talk about that today with a very special guest, and we're going to do that, of course, with a co-host of this program, Eric Eggers. Eric, how are you?
I'm excellent. I actually feel highly qualified because despite what you say, I took a class in high school called Indoctrination for Dummies, so which is how I ended up here. But we're very excited to be speaking to one of our colleagues and yet the newest author in the GAI stable, Priscilla West. You know, I have to tell you, this is a bit of the backstory. This was actually my idea. She stole this book from me, Peter. We hired Priscilla to talk about this education project. And the next thing I know, she's got this book out about woke education. But I do think that the audience is going to learn quite a bit because what she has discovered is shocking. And it can get kind of technical in these anesthetized terms. But if you peel back the layer of what's happened to public education, Priscilla's book, I think, explains why.
That's right. It's called The New Face of Woke Education. It's by Priscilla West. She's a researcher at the Government Accountability Institute. She's also trained in chemical engineering and has done a lot of work in the corporate world. She's a parent. She's also a chapter chairman of Moms for Liberty. Priscilla, thanks for joining us on the program.
Thank you for having me, Peter and Eric.
Well, so you've drawn a comparison or a connection between social emotional learning and the spread of extremist rhetoric and action in America today. What is the connection between this sort of approach to education, which is now so popular, and normalizing the radical behavior that we're seeing today?
Right. Well, what started out social emotional learning, it started out as a way to teach students things like empathy and self-awareness. But there's a lot of subjectivity there, right? So anytime you have a focus on emotions and subjective concepts, there's a lot of room for injecting radical ideology, frankly. So you get activist teachers who have also been steeped in this type of learning in their education programs, and you have a lot of kindling there ready to ignite.
Yeah. Well, and it seems like what they've done is rather than trying to raise up young people, I mean, look, if you say, hey, we want people that are emotionally secure, emotionally balanced, tolerant in the right sense, right? You need to recognize other people, accept other people in a way. But it's become sort of this radicalized version. How did we get to the radical part? Was this kind of camouflaged from the beginning, social emotional learning, or was it something that the left kind of co-opted, right? It offered a few insights here and there, but the left co-opted and kind of ran with it. How did we get to the point where we now have litter boxes in some schools because of the so-called furries?
Right. It was to the left in the beginning, but it started out more along the lines of, as we said, empathy, kindness, tolerance. The people who really got this going in our schools were all kind of new age spiritualist types, and as well as a lot of psychologists. So that right there is a really dynamic mixture of people really wanting to improve the world or create their vision of a kinder, more tolerant world, with people who know how to press buttons, know how to press the kids' buttons and get them really switched on to this way of thinking.
What's really interesting about this is, and your book, I think, kind of gives some granular detail to a societal trend that others have observed. We've never spent more time or energy focused on social emotional well-being, yet we have never been less emotionally healthy as a younger generation. You use a phrase, weaponized compassion, and but you also talk about how this movement that includes weaponized compassion has led to rising anxiety, alienation, nihilism. I mean, the surveys, the unfortunate fact is we now can document how unwell we are as a student population because of all the data we are collecting. And that data turns into spending that you and I pay for through our tax dollars on programs that only make the problem worse. But Priscilla, what examples can you give us of how a policy, as well intended as it might have been, turns into actual tragedy in terms of the devastation of the collective emotional well-being of our students?
All right. Well, you have everything from the example you just mentioned about furries. You know, when you're continually telling children, be kind, be accepting, be tolerant, and any type of dissent or disagreement is viewed as intolerant, then you have children accepting that their classmates might be furries, might be kittens, you know. So that's kind of a less harmful example, as disturbing as it is. But when you get into something like the recent tragedy with Charlie Kirk, you've got kids who have been steeped in this idea that words are weapons, that speech can be violence. So you really have a very short distance to go before you end up as violence can be speech.
Well, and also, to your point, I think this is a really important point you're making, Priscilla. If you say that speech is violence, in effect, what they would say on the left is that Charlie Kirk was committing violent acts whenever he expressed his position about his faith or his views on affirmative action or his views against socialism. He was committing, quote unquote, acts of violence by that definition, which maybe necessitates a violent response. So are they really rationalizing it that way? Is that really part of what you think is fueling these sort of teen assassins that are out there?
Right. I think it is. A lot of these programs in the schools, this social emotional learning comes with a lot of different names. If words are violence, if debate is danger, then these kids see, some of them, I mean, the more radical ones, they see violence as virtue, right? Silencing someone who they see as doing harm. They have been taught at school that disagreement, that intolerance, or what they see as intolerant words are harmful. And this is framed this way in many SEL programs, that disagreement and debate can be harmful.
So I think one of the things, Priscilla, that people will find troubling here is they think in 2025, Donald Trump's been elected again. They think that has been a rejection of this woke ideology and that DEI has been dying. Donald Trump's election meant that, hey, the reign of DEI, which reached its peak during the Joe Biden reign, is over. But your reporting suggests that that's actually not true. DEI hasn't died. It's just mutated. How so?
That's right, Eric. Parents on the conservative end of the spectrum are very excited because they think that DEI is dead. But unfortunately, it is really metastasizing. There is an entire glossary of woke, a million different terms that this stuff comes under in the education literature. When we were combing through school board meeting minutes and education research, even venture capital annual reports, the number of headings under which this falls is absolutely mind-boggling. You've got everything from resilience education to 21st century skills to the social emotional learning that we talked about. We've seen DEI offices all over the country rename themselves things like the Office of Culture and Belonging. It's all, as I said, very subjective. So you can, it's kind of amorphous, right? You can fit a lot under these headings.
Yeah, like we were saying at the beginning, they don't come out and say we're indoctrinating your kids. It's all about belonging or emphasizing things that are good qualities, but they have kind of an agenda behind it. Priscilla, I wanted to ask you particularly about the sort of emotional state of young people today. Now, Eric and I have covered ad nauseum the problems with social media, right? The kids are attached to their iPhones. They're spending time on social media. That is clearly affecting how they are emotionally, not only their attention span, but it can lead to depression and anxiety.
And if you've missed our coverage of that, by the way, you can find it on TikTok. So
yeah. But that I think is clear and obvious. But I feel like in a way that's letting this woke education off the hook, because isn't the educational system itself causing anxiety, acknowledging what social media does, that it's bad, that we need to limit children's ability to use it. But are there things in the woke education agenda that you believe are causing anxiety, that are causing some of these other social problems that we're seeing in young people?
Absolutely. It is a culture of fragility. Everyone talks about resilience education, but these kids are absolutely not becoming more resilient. We have, if you remember after the Parkland shooting, a lot of the analysis of what was going on there, we had something called restorative justice. You hear about safe spaces. These things are all kind of SEL adjacent. They're all to do with the social emotional learning and this inculcation of ideological conformity, I suppose. The language is about empathy, but the actual what is being accomplished here has more to do with conformity.
We talked a lot about COVID. Now COVID has shifted things, but it sounds like COVID, I mean, to me, COVID changed the social contract because it taught us to see each other as vulnerable. Yeah. And I'm wondering, and this is sort of in line with that, right? Because this is saying the kids are vulnerable. And I think when you grew up and when I grew up, that was not the perspective. And it seems like it's tied to everything. It's like, oh, the weather might be bad. Like we close schools on the regular. I mean, it just seems like we've shifted somehow and we see the population is vulnerable and that there's threats everywhere. You see them as vulnerable, but I also think, and I'm interested in Priscilla's thoughts on this, it also seems to me that what happened with COVID and what this woke education effort does is it sows suspicion between people, right? So with COVID, we were suspicious that somebody might be sick. They're coughing. Do they have COVID? They might make me sick. But then it got to the point where they had those snitch lines, right? You're supposed to actually call in and report, and they were pulling surfers off the beach. So it caused this suspicion. But it seems to me in the woke education space, Priscilla, please comment on this, you see the same thing going on, because it's not a question of, Charlie Kirk or somebody else has a different opinion on affirmative action or has a different opinion on American history. No, I'm actually suspicious. They're actually racist. Well, it's not just a different opinion. There actually is something deep inside them, like a virus. Yeah. It could be racism. It could be bigotry. That's a real threat to me. That's what I think has happened. To the point where the FBI went so far as to label parents who questioned what was being taught in schools as potential domestic terrorists.
Yeah. What do you think about that? Do you think that woke education, Priscilla, is fueling suspicion between people when it's supposedly this great unifier?
I do. Long gone are the good old days of sticks and stones will break my bones, right? If only we could go back to that, because children are absolutely being conditioned to see their peers as threats, as you said, with the sniffle, oh, your mask slipped below your nose, and words as being harmful. Many of these SEL programs have encourage children to analyze how their words will affect their peers. And obviously that is a good thing. But it used to be kind of par for the course. Now the academics have taken it several steps further, and they're being surveyed and gauged on exactly how will their words affect this group, that group. There's a lot of politicization going on there.
I think that's probably the last area to talk about here is like these surveys, because your schools are grading emotions and monitoring bias. Like, how widespread is that, and what happens to those grades? And I mean, are there consequences if a school gets a bad grade because they're perceived to be too biased?
Right. It is absolutely widespread. It is all over the country. This is in, I believe, 83% of schools, affecting 90% of children in U.S. schools. SEL is kind of embedded in everything they do. Even if you ask your teacher, you ask your school board member, what SEL curriculum are you using? A lot of times the answer you'll get is we don't do that. Our school boards locally tell us that here, we don't do that. We don't have an SEL curriculum. But it's not a secret that all of the major publishers have embedded SEL in the core academics. It's in the math, it's in the reading, it's in the history. So, and a lot of this is cloud-based learning. So the kids are getting it through the computers, even when they're not getting it through activist teachers.
We are talking to Priscilla West. She's a researcher at the Government Accountability Institute, has a great new book out, The New Face of Woke Education. You can get it on Amazon and elsewhere. It's not a long read, but it's a powerful read. I guess in closing, Priscilla, what can you give as a source of encouragement to parents out there? I mean, obviously parents have an option. They can homeschool. They can put their kid in a private school. Probably some of the private schools are doing this as well. But what is something a parent can do that maybe doesn't have that option? They can't afford it. They don't want to do it. They're in a school. What are the breadcrumbs that they can look for? They go in, they meet, and the principal says, oh no, there's no SEL education here. What are some of the clues that they actually are using SEL, but they're just calling it something else?
Right. There are so many clues. When you start looking at this enough, they do become more obvious. At first, it seems almost kind of silly. I remember my kids' school talking about grit. There was a whole big campaign about without the grit, you don't get the pearl. And I had no idea. I thought it sounded great at the time. But if you start picking up a lot of subjective, emotional language, it's a lot of psychology. The kids are being analyzed at every turn, especially with the cloud-based learning, with the adaptive learning software. So if your child is talking about these things and using these politicized terms that you would not have expected them to be speaking, you can bet that they're getting some of that at school. And they are.
It's funny to think about, but like inherent in the idea of grit, which sounds good,
yeah.
But you can't have grit unless you have hardship. So in a sense, this like curriculum is teaching kids to seek out and internalize hardship, which
right.
is, this does predate COVID. It used to be, there was I'm the first person of this ethnicity to get a college degree. Intersectionality was the move. And it was like your culture upbringing made you vulnerable, and that was like your source of strength. Then it became, no, your physical infirmity, like the fact that you had a hard time breathing became your source of strength, and that's what elevated you during COVID. So it is interesting to see the evolution of this, but it's unsurprising, although very disappointing to see the way it's made its way into our school system. But I do think Priscilla's done a very good job of helping to expose this. Yeah,
it's a great book. I encourage everybody to pick it up. Eric, you're the parent of 3 school-age kids. What advice, having studied this, knowing the work Priscilla's done, what do you think parents should do to engage on this?
Literally last night, my daughter came home and a kid was being mean to her about her hair. They said they didn't like her edges or whatever. And I said, well, just tell them that your daddy makes much more money than their parents do, and kind of end it there. So that's my advice. I don't know,
go big or go home.
I didn't write the book on this, so I'm not sure Priscilla got into that or not, but that's how I handle it.
Well, great work, Priscilla. It's a terrific book. I encourage everybody to pick it up. She's going to be doing more work and more research in this area. We're very excited. We're very proud. Thanks for joining us on this podcast. And we thank you, the audience, as always, for listening to this podcast. You can find out more about the research that we do, including Priscilla's, at thedrilldown.com. And we ask that you please hit the subscribe button and subscribe to this podcast. Thanks again. Until next time.